Okay. Good morning. Today is the 1st of January, 2018. We're with Yehuda Solter at your residence in Bnei Brak, Ateret Rimonim.
A geriatric institute.
Geriatric Institute.
He's here because of his leg. His right leg has a swollen knee and he can't walk around, and he's connected to a wheelchair.
How long have you been here for?
I've been here for 7 weeks.
7 weeks.
Until then, I was completely capable of getting around all over wherever I wanted to go. Now, I want to tell you a few things.
Wait a second. Okay, please, tell me.
I'm only 97 and a half years old. In that period of time, I've been in almost every Zionist youth Chalutz organization that was ever established in the United States and then afterwards here, including Hashomer Tzayir, including Patwa, including Avuka, including AACI, including Nachal, including AVI, including any other organization you can think of that was a Chalutz in an organization that existed. So now, you can expect that I had been interviewed several times. However, very few of those interviews ever got anywhere beyond the front page of the book that said I was a companion of the person who wrote the book, or spoke to the person who wrote the book, or cooperated with the person who wrote the book. And beyond that, there's no quote. For instance, like the book about Americans and veterans in Israel, I was a close friend of Joseph Heckelman. And beyond that, we've had activities of Machal here in Israel over the years.
Sure. Were you a member of Machal?
I was always a member of Machal from the very beginning. Although I wasn't a recruiter from abroad,
right.
I was recruited from here in Israel at the time that the Machal began to organize in Israel. In any event, I've been at most of the Machal affairs that took place over here, including a last one that AACI had, where we visited a museum in the Air Force Museum, where I had a chance to talk to Smokey and to what it called, and to Greenfield.
The publisher. He has a publishing house, I think. Geffen.
Yeah, Geffen.
And what about David Tapperson? David Tapperson.
I think David Tapperson's not alive anymore.
He's not, no.
I had a chance.
Yeah.
There was AACI conference in Netanya a couple of years ago, where he and I and a few others spoke on Machal.
Now that you've explained to me about a little bit about what you've been involved in, can I ask you a question? Where were you born and when were you born?
I was born July 20th, 1920 in Detroit, Michigan. Yuffie. I have even a plaque that there was the Michigan Council of Jewish Soldiers gave to all the veterans.
I'm from Detroit.
Are you aware of a plaque that the Michigan what do you call gave to servicemen?
I am not. But I want you to tell me where in Detroit were you born?
I was born And Josephine Street.
Josephine Street in Detroit.
Yeah, 633 Josephine.
And were your parents born in Detroit?
No.
Where were they born?
My mother was born in Ukraine,
In the Ukraine?
and my father was born in Russia.
And they immigrated
To
to Detroit?
Detroit, yeah.
Did they
They
come?
married in Detroit.
So they met in Detroit.
They met in Detroit. They married in Detroit. They built a house in Detroit, and he had a business. He was a contractor in Detroit, and we lived there for 20 years until about 1944, 45. They separated, and he moved to Phoenix, and she remained for a while in Detroit. I was in the Army at the time.
Well, we'll get to that in a sec. I want to know, what do you know where in the Ukraine and where in Russia your family's from? Or just...
My father, I'm not sure, but my mother, I know, comes from Chernigov.
Chernigov?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, look, that's been researched also by someone who is quite able to look into archives and to look into records. So we have a certain amount of information on that. And we have information as to how the name Solter came from, probably from a name called Solotov.
Solotov.
Something like that.
Maybe Sokolov.
I know. Salitra, that was what the name was. There's a record of a place called Salitra. That's possible where my father came from, someplace in Russia. Salitra, and from that name, he and his cousins changed the name to Solter.
Solter. Now, your mother and father met in Detroit.
Yeah.
They came separately to Detroit.
Yeah.
Probably for economical reasons. Detroit was a booming city back then, in 1920.
I'm not so sure about blooming, but I know that the Jewish organizations were sending people out of New York, out of Ellis Island, to all kinds of different places. Rochester, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit, Chicago, places like that. So that actually, that it wasn't that. It happened that he had a cousin who was here, who was working as a mason contractor, and to whom he came to work, and he learned the profession, and he became a contractor also.
What kind of household did you grow up in? Like, was it religious? Was it Orthodox? Was it communist, socialist?
No, it was mostly what we call traditional in a lot of ways, because of the fact that there was, my mother was very Zionistic, and my grandmother was very religious, and she was living close by with. My father was not very, very interested and didn't make an issue, so that actually, under the influence of my mother, I had a Yiddish and a Hebrew education.
And of course, American English, of course.
Oh, I went to a public school.
You went to a public school.
Yeah.
So did you observe the Sabbath at home? Was it a kosher house?
It was a kosher house. We didn't observe all of Sabbath. We recognized Sabbath, but the point is that I was quite young when I joined Hashomer Tzir, and a lot of our activities are on Shabbos, so that we weren't able to really, we ride back and forth to go to meetings, so that it wasn't exactly a Shabbos occasion like you would consider going to shul on Shabbos, and all of the different traditions of Shabbos, like Shlosha Sudot, V'Tvilah, my mother lighted candles every Friday night, that's true, and other things like that. And she had other conditions that were strictly religious, in the sense that she learned from her father, who was a very religious man.
Now, do you have any siblings, or are you an only child?
I have two daughters.
No. In your family?
Do I have any siblings? They're not alive.
But-
I had 2 brothers and a sister.
And where are you in the spectrum?
I was the first.
You're the oldest.
Yeah.
You're the oldest. And on your birth certificate, is it written Judah, or what's your name that you're?
It was written Judah and Julius.
So were you? People called you Julius in Detroit.
In the public atmosphere, in the non-Jewish atmosphere, it was Julius.
Julius. And tell me, growing up in Detroit, the first Jewish organization that you get involved with is Hashomer Tzair.
Yeah.
How old are you at this time?
14.
14. After your bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
Now Hashomer Tzair is very socialist.
So?
I'm
Hashomer Tzair and then was not very socialist.
okay.
It was very Zionist.
Very Zionist. Okay.
It wasn't religious Zionism, but it wasn't socialist. We were not especially labeled. However, you see, in the United States, Mapam wasn't really understood. Hashomer Tzair was a youth movement, like the Boy Scouts.
Right.
And so there wasn't that kind of a, a labeling of Hashomer Tzair socialistic.
It was Zionistic.
It was Zionistic. Chalutziyut.
Chalutz.
It was the most enterprising. We raised the most money for Keren Kayemet and all kinds of things like that. So that it was very, very Zionistic Chalutziyut. And also the fact that from Detroit, there were several groups of people who went to Palestine already. In 1929, the first group of Americans part of them came from Detroit. Haggai and other people like that came from Detroit in 1929 and established and a shofet.
And a shofet is,
Sure.
is
Hashomer Tzair,
part of it are
and some of the people are from Detroit.
Detroit.
Now, afterwards, there was also people who came from Detroit for 2 or 3 other kibbutzim. Kibbutz Bet is also part of people who came from Detroit. Kibbutz Gimel, not so many, but Kibbutz Dallas, quite a few people came from Detroit. In Detroit, so that Hashomer Tzair was considered a chalutz movement and not a socialist movement.
Okay.
Only after the establishment of the parties in the states and the political battlefield that took place did Mapam become recognized as a socialist movement.
And then it affiliated with Hashomer Tzair being
Associated with it, it became what it called, passed on what it called. Also, all of the political points of view were not very clear at that time.
Sure.
Today, some of the principles of Hashomer Tzair then were the exact opposite of what they are today. At that time, settlement of Hashomer Tzair could take place any place in Israel, all over the country.
right.
And today, it's supposedly restricted only to the Green Line. You see what I'm saying? But I got out of Hashomer Tzair quite early, before the state.
When did you get out of Hashomer Tzair?
I got out of Hashomer Tzair in the beginning of 48.
Okay, so you were quite active for a long time in Hashomer Tzair.
Well, active, schmactive, it depends on what you call active.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about Detroit background. Did you deal with, when you were growing up in Detroit, did you have to confront or deal with any sort of anti-Semitism?
Yes, we came across a number of cases of anti-Semitism, and we had the cooperation of the council. Detroit had one of the first councils in the United States.
What kind of, like
They
a
had
city
a man they brought from Harvard called Frank to run the Jewish Council. It was an office that they established downtown in Detroit. We were informed of a butcher who had a big sign no Jews allowed. And so we went there and we painted the whole window off with paint so that everybody would know that here is an anti-Semite of the first order. Detroit was very anti-Semite, with Coughlin and all the rest.
Father
So
Cog-
the way called, we had a lot of anti-Jewish propaganda. However, there were no physical actions that you could record at the time in Detroit.
Well, if we're talking about Detroit in the 30s, there's that famous baseball player named Hank Greenberg.
So,
He was was it a big deal to the Jewish community?
sure, it was a question of whether he'd play on Rosh Hashanah or whether he wouldn't play. Of course, Greenberg was a famous name in Detroit. Hank Greenberg was a very good baseball player. First place, I think he played.
First base, he did, yeah.
Huh?
He did, yeah. He did.
See, it's a little bit of memory.
Now tell me, when
That makes me authentically a Detroit, huh?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My father is from Detroit, and I was born in Detroit.
Where did you live?
I lived far out, but my father was born on Dexter,
Aha, that's another new neighborhood for.
from where you were. Yeah, I mean, my father was born in '39. Tell me, I'm going to speed up a little, but regarding pre-World War II, before World War II, are you guys hearing in Detroit about what's happening in Germany? Like Kristallnacht, or do you guys...
Yeah,
are things
the
coming soon?
Hashem was the first one to publish any kind of information, literature on the Holocaust. There's a couple booklets that they put out on the burning frontier or the lost generation, something like that. The Hashem put out specifically as a result of the work of Heike Grossman and a few other people who came escaped and got to France, and from France came to different places where they could publish information. So that we knew about the Holocaust, the beginning of the Holocaust.
Beginning, yeah. And when World War II breaks out, when the Americans, after Pearl Harbor, you're already 21 years old. You're already an adult.
Well, I had a very interesting history in that regard. I wanted to be a bricklayer, but I had an accident on a trip to a Shemer camp where my arm was broken and we couldn't put it together again for a month. And it had to be tied together with wire and screws. In any event, as a result, there was no torsion, no complete torsion in this arm. And so bricklaying was out. So I studied aeronautical mechanics in a private school. And aeromechanics in a private school, Hartman School in Detroit at that time. And I passed all of the tests to be a teacher. And I was accepted by the Navy to be a teacher of mechanics. And I was appointed to a course in Chicago. And from Chicago, I went to Norman, Oklahoma, where I taught for about 8 weeks Navy personnel in aeronautical mechanics. My draft board in Detroit needed me people, and they drafted me out of that into service, and I went to boot camp in Wisconsin. After boot camp, they didn't know what to do with me because they said, you have a bad arm. So I said, what am I going to do? Well, you can do prison guarding or you can do dishwashing. I said, screw you. I said, I'm not going to do this. I went and found a doctor from Detroit who turned me over from limited service to general service. I got back into the Air Force, And I went back through a whole series of training courses, and then I went to Tampa, Florida as a mechanic on P-39s.
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 Are those the Mustangs?
No, they were not the Mustangs. They were Tomahawks.
Okay.
Mustangs were the P-51s.
P-51s. Okay.
After those P-40s, also a kind of
So they send you to Tampa.
Tampa, and from Tampa I went to Bartow. From Bartow I was shipped to California to North American to study the P-51, and I ended up in Lukefield, Arizona as a mechanic on P-51 airplanes. And I worked on P-51s for almost 2.5 years, all of the models, including the D model, that were the last ones out.
So most of the
that was all World War II.
World War II. So most of the war you spent in Arizona.
Yeah.
Fixing.
Yeah.
Building or fixing.
Fixing. Repairing. Snags. Putting airplanes back together again.
After they were damaged or.
Yes. Whatever. I would give it a snag sheet and go out and find the airplane that they were talking about, fix it up and tell them this is available, and they used it for different training purposes.
And when the war is over, are you in Arizona?
And the war is over in Arizona. I was discharged, and I went to New York, where I was involved with the Hashomer Tzir activity, and also worked in a warehouse called Overland. I forgot. In the Bronx, we had a warehouse where they were shipping in all kinds of surplus war material, and we were boxing it. I worked there for about 3 months.
Okay, wait a sec. So you get discharged from the Army in New York.
Yeah.
Fort Dix?
No, in Detroit.
Oh, so you go to Detroit, you get discharged from the Army, the war is over, and then you continue your activity in Hashomer Tzir?
In New York.
You go to New York. Why do you go from Detroit to New York?
Because in New York we had a collective house where people could come to and be with and be part of the organization that was formed to go to Palestine. That was what do you call it? An Aliyah group.
Okay.
I was part of Aliyah Dalit, and so I wanted to be with the people who were involved in going to kibbutz together as soon as possible.
So you decide after you get discharged from the Army that you're going some way or another to Palestine.
Right.
You're leaving everything behind. You're going to Palestine.
Right.
But you go to New York, to the Bronx. And in the Bronx, now we're talking about what years? 45, 46?
And this is 1946. This is April, May, June, July 1946.
And can you explain to me exactly what the activities you're doing in New York at this time is?
Well, I had several activities. One activity I mentioned was boxing stuff for surplus war material that came on ships back to Israel. I met a person that Ben-Gurion sent to investigate aviation in the United States by the name of, forgot. In any event, he's well known, is written up in the purchase of all kinds of things. And I did a couple of days' work researching aviation for him, which was useless because of the fact that was no way of going about finding out about airplanes here. Outside of that, there wasn't much for anyone could do besides wait to see how things developed. In any event, all of a sudden developed a very interesting situation where the kibbutz was able to buy 2 places on board. Freighter,
Which kibbutz?
Kibbutz Dalet. Hashemer Kibbutz Dalet was able to pay for 2 season tickets, 2 season cards for seamen. Me and another member were chosen to act as seamen on the way, on a trip of a boat to, it would stop in Palestine, in Haifa, and was supposed to go on to India and come back. So they chose me and another fella, and we worked as wipers in the engine room of this ship going across.
Do you remember the name of the ship?
I don't remember, but my brother-in-law knows.
But I still want. Hold on a second. I just want to just stop for a sec. Hold on.
1946.
Before, I want to just ask you about your activities in the Bronx before you go to Palestine.
In any event, I boxed boxes. I had a crew. Look, there were people from Hashemer who were running the place. When I came there in April, I said, I'll be glad to work for you. They said, we only pay $50 a week. I said, that's no good for me. He says, why? I want 75. I said, well, 75? We never pay anybody 75. Well, you'll pay me 75. In any event, after the first week of working, they thought it was worthwhile.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that I had a lot of experience in cutting, pounding, building, and putting together things. And none of my boxes ever broke.
What was in the boxes?
All kinds of material for making arms. There were all kinds of lathes, all kinds of other tools, all kinds of machinery. That Slavin is the name of the person, and among the other people who bought our material all over for surplus. Plus the fact that there were, what do you call it? We had about 15 gangsters who were collecting things for us.
Define, what's a gangster?
A gangster is a guy who stole. They stole from all kinds of warehouses and all kinds of other things and brought it to, made it available for our effort.
Were these Jewish gangsters?
Well, mostly, all of them were Jewish gangsters.
Mafia related?
It's part of the literature, isn't it? Part of the, you don't know. It's part of the literature. You've never read about it? Well, fortunately, you never heard about it. So now you know about it.
What was going on? Did you have what kind of relationship you guys have with these gangsters?
We never knew them. We didn't care to know them. We didn't have anything to do with them.
Okay.
All we know was that our truck would come in and unload stuff like that. And we knew that there was a source. There was a lot of, what do you call it? There was Israelis who were shoo, quiet. They were secret people who handled the connection between all kinds of different things. We had no intention to connecting with them. Just like in Palmach. Palmach was very secretive to a lot of the people around them.
Sure.
The same thing is true with a lot of activity that took place in Haganah, in purchasing and getting a certain amount was stolen from places.
Where was the warehouse? In the Bronx?
Yes. I was in the Bronx. I may have mentioned it. Look, I have a Hebrew review of all the things I can't see it myself.
Can I have a look?
Take a look, maybe someplace in here. That's in Sarona, but maybe just before.
Hold on. It says you in April 1946 you worked in the inland.
Inland machinery.
Exactly. Inland machinery.
That was a warehouse.
In the Bronx.
That was the Bronx warehouse.
That was the place in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And it says here. That you belonged to a group.
People with kibbutz Dalit.
Yehuda Solter and Aaron Gordon. From Detroit.
Gordon.
עלו על האונייה באוגוסט 1946 והפליגו מזרחה.
נכון.
אחרי הפסקה במצרים,
כן.
אותה ניצלו לטיול, הגיעו לנמל חיפה.
נכון.
So you from the ship. From the ship that you left in the States, you arrive in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Straight from New York, you go directly to Egypt?
Mm-hmm.
Anything you remember about Egypt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell me?
Oh, we spent 4 days in Egypt.
Okay.
We visited the pyramids, we visited the Sphinx, we visited the rose markets, we visited Cairo. That was it.
And do you remember the date that you arrived in Haifa?
No.
No, but it was in 1946.
Yeah.
And it says that you immediately went to
Mishmar
Emek.
Yeah.
And you to Garin Daled. So it was a Garin of Americans.
They was already there.
They were already there. What's your first impression when you get to the kibbutz? They
take me to a certain place where there's a pile of flat plate. What do you call it? We call them platot.
Like where you put like a.
Like they made a walkway with platot, square platot.
Made out of
concrete. Out of concrete.
Okay, out of concrete.
Concrete, that's it.
Okay.
There was a pile. They said, here, you lay the floor, and we'll put up a tent.
Uh-huh.
That was my first impression, okay?
Makes sense. You came to work.
I came to participate, not to work.
Okay, to participate in what?
In the activity, in the life activity of a group of people. It wasn't just a question of working, a question of meeting and talking and living, eating, playing, all kinds of things. But I worked like a horse that 9 months that I was there. They put me in the binyan to work with one of the people who were from the Shoah. There was one person who was paid in Mishmar Emek.
Okay.
Everybody else was on a socialist basis, part of the commune. Only one person was paid. That worker that I was working with.
Okay.
And so you can imagine that the difference that existed between our crew and any other crew in the police. It was like we were contracted. In any event, it was very strange and very difficult for quite a while. We had a very interesting opportunity to see all kinds of things. My wife had originally been from Jerusalem, so she knew Jerusalem.
Where was hold on?
Huh? And so we visited Jerusalem, and we met a lot of people that her family knew, and places that are very famous. And I think that I was close to almost every historical event that took place in Jerusalem. The vote in the UN, I was in Jerusalem. The Declaration of State, I was in Tel Aviv. Therefore, 15th, I was at the airport fixing airplanes. We were chased away from the house when the Altalena was burning. We were involved in almost every important thing that took place.
You looking for your phone?
No, go ahead. Is that a question?
Yeah, I want to make sure that the microphone is right there. So you get kind of disillusioned with the kibbutz. Hold on, I have to switch a battery. So when did you leave the kibbutz?
We left the kibbutz in February of 1949. No, in February of 1948.
Now, there is a period that when you get to Palestine, it's still Palestine at the time. Do you have any interactions with any British police or no?
The point is that, you see, during the after a certain period of time in Mishmar Emek, the kibbutz moved to Nachlat Yehuda near Rishon LeZion. That was a staging point for the kibbutz to go on its own land, not from Mishmar Emek, but from Nachlat Yehuda. And Nachlat Yehuda was also in the building work that took place. And so I had a number of jobs, and also because of the fact there was no work, I had occasionally to do guard work at different places at the kibbutz, had interests.
Now, it says here that you got married in 1946.
That's right.
Where did you meet your wife?
Huh?
Where did you meet your wife?
I met her in 1936 in Hashem Eretz Seir.
Okay. In Detroit?
In Detroit, at one of the conferences.
So you met her when you were 16?
Yeah, I remember meeting her first. If you asked me when I first met her, I'd tell you that's her first met her.
And where do you guys get married?
We got married in Jerusalem in 1947.
In 1947 in Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Was she on the kibbutz with you?
Yeah.
So when you came to the kibbutz in 46, you knew that she was already there?
No, she was coming.
She was coming, so you went first?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you explain to me when the United Nations votes in November 1947 on the partition of Palestine, Kaftet b'November.
So?
Where were you? Do you remember where you were?
That night we were visiting in Jerusalem.
You were visiting in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Can you tell me anything about that evening? About that evening, it was a Saturday night.
I think it was a Friday night.
A Friday night.
I think so. I'm not sure. Friday or Saturday night. We were there. We were there not too far from the Binyan HaUmah on Rehov King George. We were someplace nearby in Teiud, I think, or in Rehavia.
In Rehavia. Now, at this time, are you affiliated with any of the underground movements?
No.
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 Palmach, Etzel, Lehi?
No.
No. And in May of 1948, so basically when the partition takes place, it's basically the first stage of the War of Independence.
Right.
It starts basically the next day.
Yes, so.
Were you involved in this, or were
In
you
what?
in any of the fighting?
Look, in February 1948, I got involved with the Shirut Avir.
Okay.
Shirut Avir was an activity, an aircraft activity, which became later on Chel Avir. Okay, Shirut Avir had was involved with repairing observation airplanes that were purchased from the British and stored in Sarona, in the basis of the vine in the vineyard, of the vinery. In the basement of the vinery, they stored 24 airplanes. And they began to take them out, and we began to replace them, replace the skin and fix the engines, and fix the engine, the legger, the wheels, and all the rest. And we finished up to June 1948, all 18 of them, because of the part, some of them we had to take parts from. You understand? I was involved in most of the running of the place because of the fact that whoever...
That's what you did in the Army in the United States. That's what you did in the U.S. Army.
No, well, not really. I didn't play with airplanes that were so small and so unimportant, was so unmechanical. The Piper airplane is a very simple airplane, and it's a baby compared to the fighter airplanes that came later on. At the same time, as we were in Sarona, we sent crews out all over the country to collect parts from the Spitz, because the English had at least 35 airfields in the country, and they had left a lot of airplane parts all over the country. And we collected airplane parts, and so that we could see how we could put together an airplane. And luckily we were able to find the last 2 or 3 parts just before the end of the end of this period.
The mandate.
The period of June, July, August.
1948.
Yeah.
So there was a ceasefire in that time.
We were involved in ceasefires or anything like that. We worked regularly through. As a matter of fact, we weren't really aware of what war was going on.
Oh.
Because of the fact we were over our head and doing what we were doing.
So you were in Sarona just working and working and working.
That's all.
You didn't ask questions, you just put the planes together, help fix up whatever you could.
Well, we were involved. We knew what was happening with our.
Yeah, just moving this. Yeah.
With our pipers, with our primasim, as they called them, because of the fact that I flew once to up north to repair one of them and to bring it back safely. We knew that they were fighting using them in the Negev as very capably to intelligence for delivery of all kinds of equipment, taking pregnant women to hospital, even bombing Egyptian lines around Beersheba. There was a group of 3, 4, 5 Vipers there, and then up in New York there was a group of 3, 4 Vipers. These were all pilots of Palmach fighters, and they have to give them credit because when you talk about Air Force, everybody talks about Americans and English and South African, and very few of them realize how much Israeli pilots in the early days did a lot of work to keep the country from being overrun. No?
I want to get back to Sarona.
No?
How many people are you working? How many people do you work with there? I mean, is it a big?
Sarona started with about 30 people, and it got to about 60. We were able to collect technicians of all kinds. We were able to collect sheet metal workers, carpenters, painters, people who knew how to cut and sew, people who had to handle it. Then we had people who were mechanics who knew how to run the engines, and there were mechanics who knew how to repair brakes and linings and stuff like that. And so we were able to collect about a number of people who were actually in the RAF in Egypt, in Jewish boys who were there, so that we had quite a staff.
Wow! And who was in charge of this operation?
The charge of the operation was a man named
It doesn't matter.
It's written there someplace.
Okay, I'm actually looking right now at
It's written there.
Shirut Avir. That was what it was called before Chel Avir,
Yeah.
right? Shirut Avir.
Yeah. It's written there.
I'm looking. And when you were working in Sarona,
Yeah.
were you living in Tel Aviv at the time on Allenby Street?
Yeah. For a while.
For a while.
Afterwards, we found a place in Trumpeldor.
Very close.
Very close.
Yeah.
And I had a very close connection with Freddie Friedman, Yaakov Ishalom. Did anyone ever mention him in any of your discussion?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Well, Freddie and I, in Sarona, used to go there every morning. He'd come by with his bike, and I would sit right behind the dog, and we would go to Sarona. And he would take me home in the evening. We were very, very close, and we worked together for a long time. He was a great guy.
Did you, when you were living in Tel Aviv and working in Sarona, did you ever go to the Machal Club on Hayarkon Street?
No,
No.
not that I remember.
Okay.
You
So-
see,
Yeah.
it began to develop very, very quickly, the separation between mechanics and pilots. And the pilots organized for themselves all kinds of parties and never invited the mechanics. Freddie, who preceded all them, and was actually both a pilot and a mechanic. Freddie flew for the RAF even before the state, and long before the state, flew in Italy and all kinds of things. So he knew, as the pilots were getting in, what they were doing and how they were doing it, and he had a great deal of say in the headquarters. Freddie knew what was going on, but we never, who were simple workers in Sarona, had never idea that there was a Hanukkah party or a Purim party or a Machal place. All the way through the history, the pilots have always taken over with all the credit, and there was no credit to any of the mechanics. As I once said at a meeting, you know, everybody here has a car. If you didn't take your car into a garage, you're in a very dangerous situation, right?
Right.
Just imagine a pilot of an airplane understanding what it is in regard to a mechanic. If you're not careful with your mechanic, you don't trust him, you're in worse shape than if you have a problem with a car.
Were the pilots very arrogant here?
Most of them were what they called, were war veterans and didn't even bothering them. And then I didn't have any much contact with most of them afterwards because all I did was put them together and transform to 101. After we finished the work in Sarona,
Yeah.
we moved to a place called Marbarot. We called it Tokyo. And then in Tokyo, we took all the parts of the P-50 Spitz,
The Spitfires?
the Spitfires, because there were people who had real experience. And they put together the first two Spitz. Freddie was very responsible for that. The first two Spitz and the boxes for the two 51s came in. And we opened them up and we put together the two 51s Ds.
What airplane is this? A Spitfire?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I finished off the airplane, checked out the important issues, made all the adjustments to the radiators, and then we transferred them to 101,
Where's 101?
Herzliya.
Herzliya, to the airfield.
Yeah. To the pilots there in the airfield, because in Herzliya there were all kinds of pilots, from Americans, French, English,
South African.
South Africans, so that everybody, there were people who had the training to fly them. So they sent us two pilots for P-51s and two pilots for the Spitz. They took them away, and that was the end of that. Then our whole group was moved to Lud, and from Lud to Tel Nof.
Tel Nof.
In Tel Nof, I was in charge of the first three hangars for the construction of new airplanes and replacing of engines. At that time, the leadership of Tel Nof, of that part of the base, called BOD, was by Goyim, that
Volunteers?
Al Schwimmer had brought to Israel.
Who brought them?
Al Schwimmer. Goyim ran the place. Don Roberts and a few others were in charge of that base. And I was in charge of the, what do you call it, of the hangars, three hangars. What do you call it? I just got, that's what do you call it?
Tel Nof.
Huh?
Tel Nof?
That's
Yeah.
Tel Nof. That's
Yeah,
Tel
the
Nof.
hangars. So the guys who were in charge of it were Gentiles.
No, I was in charge of only Israelis. They were in charge of running various shops.
Okay.
What do you call it? What's his name? Who ran the wood shop and the metal shop? Oh,
It's okay.
he was a, what do you call it, from Petach Tikva. Everybody knows him.
I'll look here. בתל נוף הפיקוד היה בידי כמה גויים שהכירו את אל שוויימר. ביניהם היו כמה מומחים לעבודות מסוימות, כמה עבודות הם מסרו לנו. אני הייתי אחראי על 3 הנגרים ששימשו לתיקונים בבניית מטוסים חדשים כמו ה-A4.
Training airplanes that were brought in boxes.
It also says here that that's where the airplanes from Czechoslovakia came.
That's right. They came, and then they took them over to
What planes came from Czechoslovakia? Do you remember the names of the models?
No.
No.
That was, this was after even the, what do you call it? There was, from Czechoslovakia came different times airplanes. Some of the beginning was the Messerschmitt. Afterwards there was a few Spitz that they came. They had some surplus that Czechoslovakia sold.
Yeah. Even though there was an embargo.
There was Czechoslovakia broke the embargo. Czechoslovakia was peculiar in that it maintained the status that Russia took. Russia thought that Ben-Gurion was going to make it a communist country. So Czechoslovakia carried on helping us. Whenever they found out that that wasn't true, they stopped the whole thing.
They pulled the plug.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned before about Altalena. Were you in Tel Aviv when that happened?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that? About what you remember?
I can tell you there was a lot of confusion, a lot of trucks running back and forth. We were chased out of the neighborhood for a couple of days for fear that it would
By
blow
who?
up. There was announcements on the radio, Kol Yisrael, asking people to leave that area because there might be an explosion and all the rest. We did. Even when we came back, we still saw it burning, and that was about the only thing I can tell you about.
Okay. Also, a date that I want to talk to you about, May 15th, 1948, when Ben-Gurion declares the state. Where are you?
Ben-Gurion declared the state on the 14th.
14th.
Friday afternoon.
Right.
I was already home from work from Sorona, and that Saturday morning, the headquarters is at the head of the street that I lived on Trumpeldor, near the ocean. And so they came and called me, and they took me by jeep to Tel Aviv to do State Dove, where we started pulling the airplanes that we had there outside, and we checked to see what they could do, and we got them flying out, away from the, what do you call it, because of the fact that there were Spitfires. At least one or two of them were attacking not only the airplanes, but attacking mostly the electric station. Reading at the time. So that's when I was happened to be at State Dove at the time of the 15th. At that time, I had a chance to see the arrival of the first anti-aircraft gun that we had there, a Beaufort. We saw it roll out, and I saw somebody jump on it and started shooting. And I think that he either hit or he scared the Dakota away, so there was no more shooting at the, what do you call it. In the subsequent 30 years, I've read about 7 different people who said that they were the ones who did the shooting. Well,
good luck.
It's good luck, well, of course.
Everybody wants his own little piece
of course.
Fame.
I can't tell you who it was because I didn't really see it.
So,
but I know, I
saw
it happened.
So right when Ben-Gurion was declaring the state, the Egyptian Air Force was attacking already.
The next morning.
The next morning.
To be exact.
Yeah. It was a Friday night. Was there any celebrations in the streets in Tel Aviv?
Yes. They were dancing and singing all over the town, as usual. Israeli youth and Israeli young people love to sing and dance and celebrate and make noise because of the fact that those are historical events. Today, with everything happening over all these years, it's not such a historical event because of the fact that you have to compare it with so many events that took place. It doesn't happen today.
When the war is over in 1949, Are you enlisted in the army as are you like in the Israeli army? Are you in
I'm in the Israeli army.
You're in
Yeah.
the Israeli army. So
Yeah.
the war is over. Are you discharged from the
I'm
army?
discharged with discharge papers.
And what do you do after that?
Well, I had already planned because of the fact that I had what do you call it? I had veteran bill, and so I went back to college in New York.
You and your wife?
Me and my wife went back to what do you call it? Now I think that Machal paid the fare. That was one of the advantages of being in Machal. The only advantage of being in Machal was that the Canadians supplied sweaters and the South Africans supplied cigarettes. And the Machal overall,
Who supplied the booze?
I have no idea. There was nobody, booze was not very much of a commodity. That was only for the pilots.
Okay.
We didn't, I had no connection with booze.
So tell me, after the war you go back to New York,
Right,
and you're using your GI Bill to go to school.
right.
What do you decide to study and where?
I decided to study in NYU aeronautical engineering. And I finished 4 years of engineering. I got my degree in 53, and in 54 came back to Tasya Avirit.
You know who I interviewed a few weeks ago? Muriel Arens, whose husband Moshe Arens.
Miriam.
Yeah.
Miriam Arens, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And her husband also worked in the Tasya Avirit, Moshe Arens.
Miriam is a very sweet woman.
Yeah.
Very, very sweet woman.
She's from the Bronx originally.
I don't know exactly, but I met her once or twice, and she's very sweet.
Yeah. Her husband was also at Tasya Avirit.
Don't talk to me about Moshe Arens.
Okay.
Moshe Arens has a long history. Moshe Arens tried to do a lot of things, and they have to give him a lot of credit for a lot of things, but there's also one or two things that bothered me. Moshe Arens was pushing La Vie to a point where it was impossible.
This is in the 80s.
I don't care what it is, it's in the 90s.
In the 1980s.
Huh?
In the 1980s.
Yeah, I know, I know what they call it. He pushed Tasya Avirit to the La Vie, and it was a very, very bad decision because it was economically impossible for us to build a La Vie.
Tell me about coming back to Israel in the 50s and working for the Tasya Avirit. What did you do? What kind of work did you do?
Well, I was an engineer at that time already, and we provided all kinds of information for the manufacture of small parts, replacement parts, according to all kinds of different drawings that we were able to gather from all over the world to fix up all kinds of airplanes. And even if we didn't have original drawings, we used makeup drawings. We had a small engineering group of draftsmen and all the rest, and we turned over those drawings to the manufacturing people in the workshops, and they made parts for the airplanes. And so we gave instructions, we gave information, and we gave materials and stuff like that, which we were able to do at the level that we were possible.
How many years did you work at the Tasya Avirit for?
I worked for about 8 years.
And after that?
After that, I was employed by a number of different companies in salesmanship and stuff like that. Then I worked for 6 years for Hugo Marom as a consultant.
I interviewed him.
Good. He was part of the show.
Hugo Marom was a
pilot.
A pilot from Czechoslovakia, a Jewish pilot from Czechoslovakia.
Sure.
And he was...
He
built airports.
Huh?
Didn't he have a company that built airports around, or something?
He organized a consultant firm, and he claims that he built airports. Okay. The only airport he did was a runway in Tel Aviv.
Did you get along working with him?
I worked 6 years with him.
Okay. I interviewed him a few years ago.
Yeah. Who goes a bullshitter of the greatest order?
He's a bullshitter, yeah. Okay.
I told him when I quit. He asked me, why are you quitting? I said, consultancy should be balanced. He said, what do you mean balanced? I said, it should be balanced. Knowledge, activity, information, correctness, and bullshit. When the bullshit starts to get more and more, then that's for me. I left him. I did a lot of work for him. I don't know, he continued to do airport work and do all kinds of work. He had a lot of connection with all kinds of private pilots and private airplanes and all kinds of deals in all kinds of emergencies, and he made a living. Good for him. He had an office, and first of all, he had an office in the airport, and then he had an office in Tel Aviv someplace. What do you call it? He and I parted peacefully.
Okay. Yehuda, before I finish up this interview, I wanted to ask you if there's anything that we didn't talk about that you think needs...
I want to say that the fact that I had 2.5 years of P-51 experience as a mechanic in the United States Air Force, and then the receiving of 2 P-51 airplanes in boxes that I could put together completely, providing them to the Israeli Air Force, was a miracle. Do you see what I'm saying? That one person here involved with complete training and complete opportunity to put together and accomplish something. It's a miracle. I couldn't have expected it in my dreams. But to have it come in my hands remains to me a miracle. That's why I became very much more religious and much more receptive to the idea of miracles. It was a miracle. That's what I want to emphasize more than anything else. There was no question that many of the things that happened during the wars that we've had, not only the War of Independence, but other wars also, there have been a tremendous number of miracles that took place for different people. But that was, for me, the biggest miracle that I had. I'm sure that other people have had big ones also. Have you heard me clearly enough to...
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Because I have trouble with my teeth, and I always feel that I'm not being heard.
That's why you have a microphone right below you, so you're heard very well.
Okay, very good.
Very, very well. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
Yehuda, I want to thank you very much for your time and for your story, your personal story. And
see, I finished off, after I left Ugo, I was hired by the Ministry of Defense to work on a number of projects connected with aviation engines. And I worked for 6 years or 7 years on one project, and then on a number of them. And so that I got together about almost 13 years of work in the Ministry of Defense. I'm still on that 13-year calendar of retirement. And so I've been retired now almost 31 years. And I enjoyed a lot of contact and a lot of activity with the Ministry of Defense, with the, with the social service of the retired people. And only this last recent problem kept me from being involved with any of the activity with them. So I was up to very recently part of activity of the retired people from Ministry of Defense. Yeah.
Okay,
I had other activities in different parts of Tel Aviv, and also I was very active in my neighborhood, so that now that my leg had knocked me off my feet, I'm very inactive in this place where I live.
And where's your home?
My home was in Ramat Gan.